right, I think we're gonna get started. So we typically just start by going around the room, introducing yourself, letting us know if you work here on campus or if you're visiting us from off campus, and say a quick sentence about what you do in Drupal. I'll start. I'm Kathleen Liu. I work here in Central IT on campus as part of our IST Drupal team.
I'm Caroline Boyden. I also work on the IST Drupal team, and I also work in web accessibility.
I'm Paul Grantham. I'm a volunteer creating an orchestra management website for community orchestra in San Francisco.
I'm Alex Godwin. I'm from the history department. I run the history department's Drupal site as well as do some other Drupal stuff on campus.
I'm Julie Van Skoy. I'm in the Department of Environmental Science, Policy and Management. Our site for our department is on WordPress right now, but we're probably moving to Drupal, and I work with the web people in the College of Natural Resources on a couple of other Drupal sites and applications.
Hello everyone, I'm Ashley Villanueva, and I'm the Web and Graphics Manager for the Tank Center, who's currently on Dreamweaver, but we want to move over to Drupal. And I also do communications work with the Division of Real Estate, who's on Open Drupal, but I'm also supporting them with web.
Hi, I'm Gringa. I'm with Willa. I was introduced to Drupal and I love it. I'm trying to move our website to Drupal and I ran into a very steep problem. I've been troubling her. But I'm glad to be here because this is one of my forms. It's one of my big challenges.
Great.
Hi everyone, my name is Morteza Faji and I'm working for the psychology department as a application developer, and actually I run their website, which is on Drupal, and that's why I'm here trying to learn as much as I can.
Great.
Regarding this.
I'm Queen Nebraski. I work in research IT, and I work with a number of faculty project in digital humanities that are based.
Great. And my name is Anna Gazdowitz. I work in Central IT with Kathleen and Caroline here, and I'm on the IST Drupal team as well as the web accessibility team. And I'll be your presenter today. So it wrapped up very nicely. So I wanted to start this off by saying this is meant to be a introduction and overview of setting up and just getting going with the Webform module. So we might not touch, at least in my portion, on some of the more advanced functionality, but there should be room to discuss that if anybody has questions or tips to contribute, that sort of thing. So hopefully it gets people in the right direction. Hopefully it's not, if you're already super familiar with it, I apologize, but it still should be helpful overall. So let's get started. So why use the Webform module? So like with any contributed module on Drupal.org, it's very helpful if it's used often and it's actively maintained. You don't want a module that's not really ever checked in on and might fall totally out of date, and in this case, the Webform module seems to be pretty actively used. And if you look at the Drupal.org sort of log, usually it's someone has contributed to it within the last couple days, so it's very actively maintained. It is easy to install and build forms. You know, back in the day, I had a Drupal site and I was able to enable the module and just start building a form without a ton of other site building experience. So I can attest to the fact that the learning curve is fairly small. It is easy to view submissions in a few different formats, including email and spreadsheet. That's very, very helpful. They provide some other analysis and graph kind of stuff that I'll show at some point. In this case, it's not, since it is a Drupal module, it's not dependent on some external service and embedding. Like if you were to, and not that those services are great too, but in this case, if you don't want to have to embed something, if you don't want to have to update your text formats to accept the HTML that's generated in the embed code, then this is a nice alternative solution. So, and then we have tested it for accessibility because we also have the web accessibility team. Sorry for the drumming. It's because they're really excited about Webform. That's why they're drumming. So we've tested it for accessibility, and there's been only a couple of minor drawbacks. And some of you may know this, some of you may not. There is a policy for accessibility here on campus as well as the other UCs. So it is important to make sure that anything you introduce to your Drupal site has been tested for accessibility and has some accessibility documentation. So on that note, I will go into the specifics of accessibility and what we've tested. So the pros overall of forms built in Drupal is that the form labels are read properly via screen reader. We tested in JAWS. Overall, our colleague who uses a screen reader was able to navigate and get to all the questions and activate all the components and found it to be very user-friendly. Same with if someone's a keyboard-only user, they're able to tab to the components without an issue. Cons are error reporting could be much better. Currently, if a screen reader user is going through the form and say they miss a required field or they don't fill out something properly and they hit save, for us sighted viewers, we will see right away there's a big red block at the top that says email address is required, something or something is required. For the screen reader user, it won't draw focus to that error reporting, so they're kind of on their own to figure out where they're at and where they have to go to fix their submission, essentially. So not great, but it's also not considered some critical blocker for use. And then similarly, in Webform, when you create a new component, you can mark it mandatory, which means it's required for someone to fill out and submit. That won't be indicated to a screen reader user. When they're reading all the components, it won't read mandatory or required. So as the person building the form, it's essential that if you have a required field, to say required in the form label. And I'll demonstrate that as well. But we did that for one of our forms, and it worked beautifully just to put it in manually. So we wish in this case that the automatic functionality that adds the little red asterisk saying that's required would read to the screen reader, but hopefully that gets implemented in the future. So yeah.
How does this compare to Google Forms?
As far as accessibility,
Yeah.
I don't know a ton. I spoke to my colleague about it, and she's found it to be very friendly to use a Google form and fill it out using her screen reader. So I don't know if she's tested error reporting specifically, but we'll probably look at that at some point.
I'm just curious.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. Other options, as I mentioned, so Google Forms is a good option for sure, as it was actually a good segue in that it is very friendly from an accessibility perspective as well. Same with Survey Gizmo and SurveyMonkey. My understanding is a lot of people have used that and integrated it quite well into Drupal. And as I mentioned before, if you are going to embed something, you'll need to make sure your text formats are updated accordingly. Otherwise, you might save it and be like, why isn't it showing up? I just added it. So, okay, so here are my notes on before you start creating your new web form, before you can just sort of get going and start building. Obviously, you need to download and enable the module. And here's where it's important to note that the web form module is dependent on views and chaos tools, which there's a good chance you already have those modules on your site if you have an existing Drupal site. But if you don't, if you're just starting from scratch, you'll notice if you download web form, it's not going to work until you have the other two modules enabled. The token module is optional, but can be very useful. It basically provides the tokens for when someone is in their browser. If they're logged in, it'll sort of automatically generate their email address if you have an email address field, and that's what the token module allows. Same with stuff like date and time. The browser is able to detect what time and date someone is viewing your web form, and it can bring in that data if you find that necessary. So again, optional but helpful. I have found it very, very useful to brainstorm / write out all of the content of your form before you start building the web form, because it'll help you determine what components you want. Do you want a select options? Do you want them to be able to select multiple options or just have the one choice? Do you want that to be a text field versus a text area with a lot of text? That can be really helpful just from a broader standpoint of constructing your whole form. But one important thing is once you've created a component and then you're like, oh crap, I meant for this to be another type entirely, you can't switch the component. You have to delete the old one and create a new one, which is not a huge deal, but if you could avoid that, it can be a little annoying, especially if you have to do it for multiple ones. Okay, so next, the web form content type. So one thing to note once all your modules are enabled, the way you'll start is you'll see the web form content type will become available in that admin structure types manage web form. If you create a new one, it'll just look blank at first, so don't get scared. That's normal. This is where you start adding your components. And then here are our component types. So after you've created a new web form, you will not click the edit field, and I will demo all of this and go into some details, but you'll click on the web form tab, and that's where you start to add and manage all of your components. Here's all the different types: date, email, field set, file, grid, so on and so forth. You'll become very familiar once you start building your own web form. And on this note, I will go and I will show off my little pre-made web form. And it's in this browser. Okay, so welcome to Zombie University. This is our new Zombie student orientation. So when we have our new Zombie students, they will need to fill out this form to attend the university and hopefully get oriented to what it's like to be a student at a Zombie student university. I just started watching The Walking Dead with my husband, so the zombies are kind of on my brain recently. So, all right. So just to give you a quick overview of my little zombie orientation form. So as you can see right off this top, I have this background sort of category, and that's actually a field set component in the Webform component options. And a field set is more or less just a category that you can add other questions and components to. It helps you organize your data and everything else if necessary. This first one, what was the date of your own death, is the date component. How many limbs are you missing? That's the number component. Both which languages do you speak and interests. These are both the select options component. One of them is restricted. I can only select one of these options for languages. This one is you can select as many as you want. Maybe you like all of these things as a zombie student. So moving downward, I've got another field set for contact information. This is the email component, and I've marked this as required. So this is an example of, I just went ahead when I created the title, I put required in parentheses, and that will solve the issue of screen reader users missing the fact that this is a required field. This is a text field, I believe, the location of gravestone. And then we are moving on to our next section, orientation information. This here, this fill out application and upload here, this is what's called a markup component, and I'll go over that as well. This is mostly my basic understanding of the markup component. It is a way to add like a note or additional information about whatever component you have either following or before, depending on how you display it. And then this here, the completed orientation application, this is the file component. So when you can specify which file types you allow, it can be images, it can be documents, so on and so forth. Food preference is another, I just couldn't resist not putting this question in, but it's another select options example. This one, the which dorm would you like to break into, that is a grid option. So as you can see, you can put your options here, but then people can have different selection options based on it. It seems to me like it's most commonly stuff like first choice, or, you know, I was most satisfied with this experience versus least satisfied, or something along those lines. And then down here is a text area, so more text essentially. So this is describe your ideal new zombie student orientation experience. And as you can see, you can pre-fill some examples if you find that to be useful. So any questions thus far? I was gonna go ahead.
Yes, this the grid, is it possible to format it, I mean, I don't just want first choice.
Oh, these are all the text here I've put in myself, so
Yeah,
you can have it say whatever you want.
Okay,
Yeah.
Okay, keep going, because I've tried to use the Webform before.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want just click one option.
Mm.
You know, I want to be able to write information, but there's no other grid that I could use. So I'm wondering if it's possible to reformat the grid.
Possibly. So let's, why don't I go ahead and start just demoing how I put together some of these components, then we'll see if it answers your questions.
While you're on that one,
Mm-hmm.
is it possible, you said that you can data enter a text for location, tombstone, I think you said.
Gravestone.
So, yeah. So what if is it possible to reference existing data within the Drupal site to say that use one of those locations? That would be an example.
Probably the token module would take care of that. And there's a bunch of available tokens that it sort of spits out. So you can select and see what you get. I don't know if Caroline has something to add.
I don't know if you can tie it
Do an
into.
entity reference.
I don't know if you can do an entity reference. You can definitely give it a list and say, you know, use this list, and then you can have a list that you reuse.
Can you
Like
pull
a list of
from a
states.
view?
I don't know if you can do a list from a view. That would be a way to do it, but
Something to try. I don't know enough about it.
Yeah, my biggest problem is connecting forms to existing data entities, basically data content.
I see.
Yeah, Webform has a lot of add-on modules.
I was going to note that actually. Yeah, when Googling like some of the different component types, I was just trying to get basic information. I was like, there's a whole other module for this particular component type. So it seems like there's a lot of add-ons that you can soup up your existing web form with if need be. So
And these widgets that are used in web forms, are they available through the rest of Drupal too?
I think it's just in the web form module. Do you mean these components like the
Yeah.
date and everything? Yeah, that's what I got just from this web form module. Whether or not there are other modules that might do something similar, it's
It looks
possible.
like there's a module called entity form that basically provides you with your standard like fields and stuff
Mhm.
in a kind of form-like way. So you might want to try that module instead of web form.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Entity.
Entity, oh, yeah.
All right, so let me just go through a few of these components. I won't spend too much time, but we can certainly go over details if need be. So you'll notice right away, the edit field is not actually going to get you to edit these particular components. You're going to want to go to the web form tab. So if I go to the web form tab, here are all of my components all in one place. And similar to if you manage menus and other sorts of similar things on your Drupal site, you can drag and drop all of these components. I have them organized that these are for here are sort of sub items of this field set, the background field set, so on and so forth. But if I wanted to move my little application one up here, I can do that. And then similarly, I would need to hit save with any other drag and drop functionality. I'm going to move that back though, because it belongs under orientation information. So let's start with how I created the field set. So if I hit edit, right away, the label is just, that's the title of your component, whatever you're going to call that. It can be a full question. It can be whatever you want. The field key is the machine readable key that's required for the web form module. It'll auto-populate that based on whatever you filled in for the label. And it needs to, you can't have spaces between words, so it'll automatically add underscores, so on. You can shorten it as much as you want or make it longer. It's totally up to you. Description is optional. That's if you wanted to add some additional description about whatever component you're adding. This is specific, this display thing is specific to the field set, so that whether or not you want to use these options, you can do so. So that's just the general, the label and the field key, that's going to be the same for all the components. So you'll see that whenever I go into each of these components to show you. So going back here, let's go as another example. So the date component. So again, we've got our label, we've got our field key, optional description. I left that blank. So the date component out of the box, you can select user time zone or website time zone. I went with website because if I have my zombie student from China putting in their time, I might want to know what that means for my time zone as opposed to having to figure it out on my own. But it's totally up to you how you want to do that. You can make this a required field within this particular component if you want. You can specify start and end date if necessary. I went ahead and enabled that little pop-up calendar, so if someone wants to pick their date from that, they can. You can select a text field instead. You can change where the label's displayed. It's all good overall. But like I said, I went with just the simple month, date, year, and then there's this little calendar option that automatically adds to it if I select that. So the number component, how many limbs are you missing? So that can be useful, and there's a lot of options here. I went with something pretty simple, which was just, I added a minimum, which is 0, and I had a maximum, which is 4, because you only have 4 limbs. I don't want people saying that they are missing like 7. So I went with the select list that creates the drop down, but you can do a text field instead. And here's where you can get fancy if you want. You can, if you're working with whatever, any kind of math or more advanced number stuff. You can do prefix and postfix and decimals and so on and so forth. I didn't get so fancy, but you certainly have that option. Yeah.
So if you want to use that number for phone, phone number, I tried using it and it keeps adding some things that I don't want, like I want to use phone, I use integers.
Oh, okay.
And when it prints out, and when it comes out, it shows very.
You said you use integers?
Yes.
I haven't tried it personally. And are you trying to show a phone number?
Phone number.
I mean, personally, we have a form with a phone number, and I just left it as a text field because it's like someone can enter their phone number, and it doesn't need this fancy number functionality. And then at least it got rid of any other overhead of like, am I doing this right? So you might consider that if it's just a simple someone typing in their phone number. So.
And in that case, if you're going to go with that approach, you would then, in the description or the help text, you could actually say the format that you want. Otherwise, you could probably find I think there's a phone validator somewhere.
Yeah.
It's very complicated.
Yeah,
International codes.
yeah.
All right, and then here's a good time to go over our select options. These can be kind of fun. So with select options, and here's where the very first time I did this, I was a little confused. So when you're actually populating your options, you need to have, these are key value pairs. So that you need to start with what they call the safe key, so the machine readable version of the option, and then you have to pair it with whatever the option is that you want to display in your options, the radio buttons, the checkboxes, etc. When I first did this, I thought I had to type in safe key for every single option, and I was like, okay, that's fine. And then I went to hit save, and it said, you can't call all of your options safe keys. That's not going to make any sense. So then I called them like safe key 1 and safe key 2, and then I learned later, I was like, oh, it's a lot simpler than that. They just need you to put in that machine readable version. It can be whatever the heck you want it to be. So in this case, I just kept it exactly what my options are, and I did it lowercase, but I don't even necessarily need to. So it's pretty easy. You just want to make sure you have the pipe in between to differentiate, and they give you they give you the instructions here just to have one option per line and so on and so forth. So for this one, since I only want them to select one option, I left this multiple option unchecked, and that means they can only select one radio button, and that's it. And then there are other options here if you wanted to get fancier with your display, so on and so forth, but I kept it pretty simple. So, and then I can show you. So now, as you can see, I can only select one at a time versus the interest, which is using the same component, but I selected that little multiple button. Now I can select as many interests as I want. Great. Okay, so we've gone over some of these basic options. Let's also, email is very similar to the date, and if you do have the token module enabled, you can select this user email as default. So if the person is logged into your site already, it'll detect that and then populate that field with their email address if you want. So, and then I just included this little note here. This is where, kind of similar to what you said, Kathleen, you can specify the format if you want someone to like put in a valid email address or put in a phone number in a certain format. You can put that in the description field. I went ahead and this is where you would add placeholder text. If you wanted to give people an example, you can do that here. Okay. All right, so the difference between text fields and text area is essentially just the text area is a big block that you can put more text in, and a text field is just a smaller field. So in the text field, you can, if you want to, create like a max width, or that's for validation. So for display, if you say, I think we have a form with like chart strings. If we want someone to only enter in 5 numbers for the first part of their chart string, we can just put a width of 5 in this display, and that'll restrict how many numbers they can add. And that can be very useful. So let's see. So then in comparison, the text area here, you can also, well, you can display the width here too, but in the case if you want, this is more for if you do want someone to be able just to write freely and not feel like they can't see what they've just written, and they can actually expand the box if they want to. But having said that, I think you can actually specify like a character limit if you don't want someone going crazy. All right, so I'll show you the file. So, oh, I'm sorry, this is the markup actually. So markup I mentioned earlier was if I wanted to add like a little description note in there, that's an option. So in this case, since I don't have any text formats specified, this is just a vanilla Drupal 7 site, I had to go ahead and fill this out in HTML. But if you do have text formats populated on your website, it should have your little WYSIWYG toolbar show up, and you don't have to worry about typing in HTML. But if you did want to add a little note either before or after a component, this is the markup option can be useful. Okay, and then the file option. Here's where you can get into the nuts and bolts of like if you don't want someone uploading some gargantuanly huge file, you can determine the upload size here, and then here's where you specify your file types. So depending on what you want people to upload, there are a variety of options available. So, and then let's look at the grid since there were some questions about that. So what I did, this is similar to with my select options. I've got to have the safe key, the machine readable version, then I have the actual display text of first choice, and then first is the safe key. So for the key value pair, and then the same for the questions. So in this case, the options is what's on top across the top of the table, and then the questions are what's along the side. And that's pretty much it. So your question earlier was about what you put in the grid.
I'm trying to generate something like this.
I can't see, unfortunately.
to be able to calculate, list an item, describe it, then calculate, give you a price, and then be able to calculate.
So based on what people have put in, you want it to be able to add and then put into.
Yes.
I don't think that's an option here. Whether or not it's available in Drupal might take some research.
Kickstarter, Commerce Kickstarter.
Commerce Kickstarter, yeah.
Commerce.
That's a distribution.
Beautiful.
Okay, so that might be an option to consider. From my understanding, just from looking at this, is it's pretty straightforward. It's just a select. And one thing I've noticed, I don't know if anyone has something to add with this with Webform, but from what I could tell, without getting super fancy into conditionals and stuff, there's no way to, like, if you select one option to have like another question appear, or like an if this, then you get to move on to the next set sort of deal. If that is an option, I would be happy to hear about it, but I haven't been able to explore it further. Okay, did I show, I think I showed the text area. Yeah, I did. So that's pretty much it for the components. And so the other options, basically when you add a new one, you just give it the name here, and then you have your little, it defaults to text field. I think that's probably what's most common for people adding web forms, but here are all the options that you can select. I think the only ones I didn't go over, so the page break option, that's if you're gonna have like, it's a really long form. If you want someone to go with the first page, that's just the contact information, you can then add a page break, and then when they fill all that out, they hit save, they'll be brought to the next page, and that's, say, background information or whatever else that they're filling out. So that can be nice, especially if you're getting into really, really long stuff.
So it makes it flow actually.
I believe so. I haven't actually tested it to see how it works, so that's my understanding. So, and then the hidden component, I honestly was trying to like research this earlier and I wasn't finding a whole lot of information. My understanding is it's when you want data to pass through without actually showing to the user submitting. I just couldn't find a for instance to show to everyone. I don't know if you have an example.
A for instance would be if you like generate a unique token, like you can use the token module, like so something that the user doesn't fill out, but is there on the form, so you get that in your results. Like,
okay.
Like if they have, like if you have someone who has a user account on your site, and so you could put in probably some calculated value, like how many times have they visited in the past month? Then they wouldn't have to fill that out; it would just be saved in the form.
Okay,
If
so that's
So if there's a way to calculate that, or anything else that you can put in a token, or you could randomly generate something or whatever.
That makes sense. So I'll do that. Okay. Any questions on components? Okay. Go back to my handy presentation here. So we've gone over component types. So results. To receive individual web form results by email, you'll need to set up those settings. And I'll show that in just a second. In the results tab, there's also options to view your submissions in a few different ways, including the downloadable options. So both are really, really helpful. So let's take a look at what that actually looks like. So here I'm in my web form tab, and I can see there's this little emails option here. So when I click that, I haven't set this up to do anything, but if I wanted to hook an email address up to whenever someone hits that save button, I can go ahead and do that here. I can add in my email. Whoops. I can never type when people are watching me. Had add, and now here's where I can get a little fancier. I can put once someone has submitted, I can basically specify what the email looks like when it comes into my inbox. The default is to say form submission from applications, whatever, but I can select a custom one if I wanted to say something more specific. I can just do it for particular questions. And then the from email is where if you do have a confirmation message set up when someone submits the form and they get an email back saying, thank you for submitting, whatever. If you want that to come from a different address, you can do that here as well. And then the name is similar. When someone receives the email, by default, it's going to say it's going to come from New Zombie Student Orientation, but I can say from my name, from department, from whatever. And then you can also, using the token, and I believe this is dependent on the token module, this is the template that it spits out to me when someone does hit the save button. So it's going to say submitted by, or submitted on this date, submitted by this person. Here's the actual the contents of the submission, and here's where you can actually go to the actual submission node and view it for yourself if you want to. And this is all customizable using whatever else the available tokens are at this link if you wanted to get fancy. I found we have a web form that we receive the submissions from, and this I find is more than enough information, but it totally depends on what you've put into your form and what information you want to get back. And I will note actually that these emails are very easy to read, which is really nice. It doesn't spit out a whole lot of markup. It just gives you the straight submitted by name. Here's the info. Here's whatever they put in for their answer. So I actually did set this up for someone who uses a screen reader, and he was able to read all the data really easily, which can be really, really helpful. So that is emails, if you want to set that up. The results tab is where if you did want to just view the results that people have filled out and you haven't been receiving the emails or both, whatever works. I haven't submitted anything because I'm not a new zombie student, so that would just be inappropriate. But if people did, they would start populating here. It's a pretty easy to read list. You can also they will display it as a table if you want. I haven't actually tried this analysis thing, so I'd be interested to hear if someone's tried that, but it will start displaying there. Download is if you want to export it and download it as Microsoft Excel or delimited text, whatever you want to do. That can be especially useful, I think, if you're working with a lot of submissions and a lot of data. It can help you keep it organized. And then if you wanted to clear all your submissions, you could do that here too, although I would say move forward carefully if you're going to do that. Okay, any questions on results? So some additional notes. I mentioned the confirmation message in the web form settings. So it's not actually, so let's see. If I go to web form, okay, so if I did want to set up my little confirmation message, I would do it in this form settings tab here. And here's where I just type whatever I want it to be. In this case, again, I don't have text formats set up on my site, so I would have to do this if I wanted any fancy formatting, I would have to do that in HTML. But for the most part, this should just be, thank you for your submissions, and we'll get back to you shortly. Or if there's additional instructions people have to take now that they've submitted, you can put that here as well. By default, if someone submits their form, it'll bring them back to whatever the confirmation message page is that you've determined up above. If you wanted it to go somewhere else on your website, you could basically specify that here. The total submissions limit and per user submission limit, unlimited is probably okay, but if you are having an issue with spam, and we'll go over spam in one of the next slides, sometimes just limiting the number that people can submit either ever or by user, that can sometimes cut down on whatever. Or if you do have, for whatever reason, someone is very into your form and is submitting it more than more, you can just limit it here. It's pretty much it. If you needed to restrict who gets to the form, if you have other roles on your sites like editors or builders or whatever, and you wanted them to be the only ones that have access to this web form, that's where you can specify that here. Some of these things too, this is how I think it shows like when they're filling it out. I haven't tested it, so won't go too into that. But like I said, this stuff can be really, really useful. Okay, so that's the form settings. So submitted by information. Okay, this was really strange. The first time I put up a form, I was very confused about the fact that, so at the top here, you see how it says submitted by Anna Gaz on Tuesday, whatever, that's the date that I created this web form. This will display to everyone right now. So if I was logged out and an anonymous user was looking at this, they would see, hey, there's this person named Anna and she's the one that created this form. If you don't want that information displayed, which I didn't the first time I set up a form, that information is actually, you have to edit the content type to get rid of that. So if you go to structure, content types, and then web form, under display settings, you just have to uncheck this display author and date information, and that'll get rid of it for you. So I'm gonna go ahead and uncheck that, save my content type, and now it's gone, voila. Similarly, so including a description or an intro to your form, like welcome to this application form, thank you for filling this out, whatever you want it to say, or if you need to provide some kind of instructions on how to proceed with the form. By default, the web form content module doesn't have this. You have to actually specify that in the content type. So I will show that very quickly. So again, navigating back to structure, content types, and web form, I need to go to manage fields, and I need to add a body field in order to add some text. So manage fields, I've already added it, but it was very, very easy. All I had to do was add the new field called body. I selected it, it created the machine name for me. I selected the long text and summary in order to have that, but there's several options available if you want that. And the widget was just the,
Yeah, you have to have selected the other one.
Field type has to be.
oh, I'm like, live demo, what could go wrong? Then you have to select the text area with a summary or whatever you want to use. That's what I did for my particular thing. So we're actually not done. So because I added my little field and then I added my description and I was like, yay. And then I went to the form and it wasn't actually there. So here's where you go into manage display. So in the default, the body was enabled, but in the full content, it wasn't. The body field that I just added was underneath this hidden section here. So I just dragged it up to above web form so that the description would actually display above the form, but you could do it below if you prefer. And then by default, actually, the label was shown, and so it actually said body above the field, and I didn't want users to say that, so I went ahead and selected hidden. Same for the teaser. Oh yeah, so for teaser, so right now my web form is showing up on my homepage because I haven't moved it anywhere. And that's the teaser mode, and my description wasn't showing up there either, so I did the same thing for the teaser mode for that to be fixed. So it totally depends on where your web form is located and how you're displaying it, but that is how you add a description if you wanted to. I should note too that if your description is not very long or complicated, you probably could just add a markup component for the very top of it if you wanted to. It's really up to you what sort of content you're putting out there and what you need. But it's easier than I initially thought it would be just to add this field here and go forth and conquer. Okay, so we've gone over those. Let's move on. So spam protection. We've used a couple of spam modules at this point. Honeypot is the one we most recently experimented with, and I have no way of knowing how well it's using because we haven't really been getting any spam submissions, but from what I can tell, it's pretty widely used, it's very actively maintained, and people are reporting that it works pretty well. Again, you'd really have to be working, if you were on a site where you were just, spam was a major issue, you wouldn't know until it's an issue what's gonna work for you. If it's the Honeypot module, if it's limiting the number of submissions in your form settings, which I mentioned is also an option, you kind of have to just see what works. The Botcha module we've also used, but the issue is it's not very actively maintained. I think we saw the last person that had looked at it was like a year ago or something. So, you know, unless it gets picked up again, it's really up to your discretion whether or not you're going to use that module. But it's still working, so we can't complain yet. And here's my little sort of PSA, please don't use CAPTCHA if you can get away with it. CAPTCHA, while it does work and it's still pretty widely used, is kind of a mess from an accessibility perspective. It's because it's an image, if someone is using a screen reader, they can't use it. And there's an audio option, but it is very, very difficult to actually hear. And it's just, it becomes a big mess. So I think we are seeing that there are better alternatives to CAPTCHA nowadays, such as Honeypot or whatever else you might find. So that's just my little note to end with. So I think we're at questions now. Thank you for attending and listening.
In submission, is there any way we could make it email the form, maybe in a PDF format?
The actual results?
Yes.
I don't think so, but we can take a look real quick.
Would that be to the person who filled it out or to the?
No, to the person who received.
I haven't seen an option to do that, to tell you the truth. But it could be something that you could try exploring. I haven't, to be totally honest, I haven't even started experimenting with conditionals tab, so there might be some options there.
If there's a conditionals tab, then you may have a way to say if they fill out this, then you want it to go here or there.
Potentially, but as far as exporting to a PDF though, I can't, the fact that they don't even, there's not even a PDF option here, so I don't feel like it doesn't bode terribly well for other options, but you could certainly try and see what you get.
Yeah, you might have to string together a bunch of different modules to make that work. Like even to export information as a PDF, That's probably a module in itself.
There is a module and it's not easy.
Okay, so it's taking something like a node or a result of a view and exporting a PDF. What's not easy about it?
I can't remember, but I worked myself and then someone else also, and we had sort of some success, but not what we wanted. So
Yeah.
it's been a while. Maybe things have changed.
It looks like there's a views PDF module, so if you combine that with like views data export, you might be able to get something. You can get your Webform into your view, and then your view is your data export, then your export to the views PDF.
Yeah, are you looking to create something like an invoice?
Yeah, you see that form.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm just, this is my area, but somebody else is taking care of that. So I've tested, actually I'm still struggling creating that app.
Yeah.
When I eventually succeed in creating the tab, I want them to be able to still receive it the way they are used to, so that they can,
Yeah.
kind of understand it.
Because that might be what you were saying earlier with the
Commerce Kickstart is,
Yeah, because they would
you
have.
need to go look at that because it has about 90% of what you're trying to do out
You
of the
saw
box.
did you see the form I'm trying to create?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it looks like an order form. By the way, they have tons of order forms.
Yeah.
They send
Yeah.
emails,
Yeah.
send requests for money, they do all kinds of stuff.
Right, and Commerce Kickstart is a distribution, which means it's a package that includes Drupal core and a bunch of modules and whatever custom code they've built, all set up so that it should work together, that you install. So like when you go to install Drupal, instead you install Commerce Kickstart, and I don't know if it's available on Pantheon as like one of their options.
Yes, it is.
It is?
It's
Okay.
a distribution.
So you could test it out. You go to Pantheon, you set up a new developer site, and you just, when it says, where do I want to start from, choose Commerce Kickstart, and then you can play around with it and see if it
So
works.
how would I be able to combine it with Open Berkeley?
Well, you wouldn't want to.
You
You
want
can.
to-
I mean, basically, a distribution is intended to be like, this is what the functionality does. Unless you're really experienced in Drupal, you usually don't even want to touch anything in the distribution, because sometimes, so we're building a distribution here on campus, and we'll pick a bleeding edge development version because it has all the right patches, and we know that that's the only one that works. So if you're on your own and you're like, oh, look, there's a new version, I'm going to just go to the next release number of your module, you might break the site. So usually when you go to the distribution, the Commerce Kickstart people have figured out that this all works together, and when you upgrade to the next version of Commerce Kickstart, not individual modules.
How possible do you think it might be for him to do like CAS authentication on top of Commerce Kickstart? I mean, things could break, but like in theory.
In theory, you could just put it in front just the way that you would do it for other sites.
Yeah, like there's a difference between, oh, I have a distribution and I just want to add a module that's relatively self-contained and use it. Or, I need something that's going to hook into what the distribution does. Like, oh, now I need workflow with Commerce Kickstart. Well, that might be a little more complicated.
Yeah, my experience is that they're quite orthogonal for most of the data sets. Things around user and registration, because those are elements that are managed both by Kickstart, and they probably, you want to do something with them. There it gets a little more subtle. You have to be really careful. You also have to start looking at things like features to package the configuration together, because some of the configuration settings don't actually move when you move the site. So you could have it running on test, put it on production, like, what?
I did a features presentation at BDUG last year. And I think we recorded it. So
Yeah.
if you go to our Berkeley Drupal users group, you could probably find a link to features.
Yeah, it's very rich environment. So.
You said go to the Berkeley, some of the old, I've been looking for them, I couldn't locate them.
If you go to groups.drupal.org/Berkeley, is that where we're?
Yeah.
It would be in.
I thought it's on Berkeley side, I was looking.
This is on, so we have, this is our Berkeley Drupal users group, so it's just another group like all the rest of the groups on Drupal.org. So if you go to groups.drupal.org/Berkeley, you should have the whole history of anything we've ever presented, as well as any links to any recorded.
But is it organized?
It's organized like everything else in that kind of, yeah, kind of.
Right, yeah.
So it is, you
You
have
have
to
to
search.
search it, yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. Yeah, can I ask a question that is not related to form?
Well, first let's see if there's any other.
Yeah, and you had a question
Webform
earlier that we were going to
questions.
pick up on, I think,
Okay,
before.
Oh, okay, sure. Nice. Oh, it's going to show you what is the conditional one, how
Oh.
you can set it up if you want as well.
Oh,
You can
okay.
look at it. how
And
it's
this-
showing.
so
And
what-
the analysis as well, you can see it. But this is an old one I created, on my own form through, Form API
Mhm.
because, we couldn't collect this information like as SID, and I wanted to connect it to FileMaker. So I just, because this one will go on the Drupal website, and based on the policy that we have, we cannot have anything on Pantheon. Any
Right.
of this,
Yeah.
sensitive data.
So this is
that-
if they do something with a component, then
Exactly.
it'll bring them to something else,
Mhm.
essentially. Okay, so what I was talking about earlier. So
Yeah,
this is in the conditionals. You
Mhm.
can start adding them here, essentially.
Exactly.
Okay, that makes sense. Great. I'm glad to hear that that worked.
Sure. And okay, so the question was, I was trying to, restrict the access to those forms that I created in Form API, but even for the, web form, I had the same issue. If you log in through, CAS authentication, but you don't have, for our users, we don't have any, account in our Drupal website. So if they come in and they don't have an account, but they can log into CAS authentication and they can see the form. But if there are, few required fields, if you fill one of them and, or, the other ones, but it fails the, validation, either, one of the fields that are empty, or it fails one of the validation, it wipes out everything. So it doesn't keep history of what happened. So I can show it to you. I have that.
That sounds bad. I mean, you would expect that if you are submitting a form and you leave a required field out, that when it shows you the error, it saves the data that you previously submitted.
And it was working before, suddenly,
What changed?
yeah, suddenly it was changed. It was working because I tested it. It was working with CAS and it was keeping the history. When you were submitting it, it was keeping it. But now, that's why I just, removed it from the, you have the URL address for, accessing it. So I just removed it and everyone can access it, whoever, can access our website.
So,
I can show it to you, even with web forms, it's the same thing.
yeah, so when someone logs in with CalNet, you have set so it doesn't create a local account for them. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And do you need that to be the case, or could you have it be that when you log in by CalNet, it does create an account, but then you don't get any extra privileges? Because that's how we have it set up with Open Berkeley, is that anyone with CalNet can go to the thing and log in, but they don't get any extra privileges, except in a couple cases where we have people who just want to protect their forms with CalNet. So you could have it create user accounts that would just be authenticated user accounts, and they wouldn't get any extra privileges. I don't know if that would help, but
If you could test a try, because that way you're not giving them any other
I understand privileges.
privileges,
Yeah.
but then if there's something that is causing, because it sounds like if you've tried the web form by itself without CalNet authentication, you're not having this problem. So it's some kind of intersection between CalNet and what you're doing. Yeah, I think that would probably be the first thing, because maybe something's happening with that user that is an issue with it. It could even be, again, a bug. With a lot of these, again, this is open source, so a lot of these things, sometimes you're the first person to try some bizarre combination of things, and that's what the issue queue is for. If you've tested it and you can repeat it, that's a good time to go into the issue queue for the module and say, here are my exact steps, and file it as a bug, and then there's a good chance that somebody.
I had a recent experience with that actually. The other experience I had for again for web forms and the forms I created, if you had two or more than one file upload, and if you were an anonymous user and the cache is enabled, so if you upload the first file and click that upload, as a managed file, and if you click that upload and try to do the second one, it was giving you a weird message that you're actually exceeding the limit, which is 100 megabytes, and the file was just it was just few hundred kilobytes, and there was some error with the caching that the ID that it had was different from the one that in the browser, and it was giving and I was going through with Pantheon. They weren't helpful at first, so it was few.
Yeah, so I'm saying that sometimes, I mean, like I said, Pantheon
Exactly.
at the end of the day is just a hosting company, so they're sometimes trying to be helpful to point in the right direction. But if it's a problem you're having with a specific module that you got from Drupal.org, then you go to that module's issue queue and you describe what you did in the module, because that's where the people that actually maintain the module can
The
help.
thing with with that was it was just giving a viewer that error. I thought something wrong with the platform, because when it gives you that it's more than 100 megabytes, it's like something wrong there. It's not. I mean, something with the Drupal itself. It's just some configuration.
Were you finding this error only on Pantheon?
Yeah, it's helpful to test it locally
Can you repeat it on
too.
a local site?
Yes, I can. Yes.
So you can repeat the error on a local site.
No.
Okay, so
I mean, I
This is-
didn't try it and after that, but I found that that's the really recent issue that they figured it out that is there, and there is no, right now the only workaround was just hide the upload button and just let all the files to be submitted at the same time. So that's what I did, and I used the CSS and just hide that button and just let it submit at one.
sounds a little crazy.
Yeah, it was crazy. It took
I
me
mean, those are the
10
type of
days
things
to
that
really figure
a
it
good
out.
thing is to, it's really easy to set up a local copy. If you haven't visited Acquia Dev Desktop, there's like a one-click install.
No, I have the local.
Yeah, because then if you can
environment.
repeat it locally, that's always a good test as
The
well.
only thing, because it was very weird, the only thing was I wasn't sure. I mean, I'm really new to getting all of this Drupal, and in casual should be enabled. There's a lot of different configuration you were saying to really create, replicate this error. So I wasn't sure what it is, and I would have figured out in a million years, because the guys, they figured it out. It was like really experts.
Yeah.
I wouldn't do
Great.
that.
Other questions on web form?
Is there an obvious way through the model to put stuff in CSS? To style it?
If you
That's,
if you specify a class in your style sheet, then I think you can add the classes in there for if they're specific to whatever web form. Yeah. Okay. If there's no other questions on web form, I think we can.
Sure.
You had another question, I think, about
Yeah,
that you
so we
wanted
could take
to-
maybe one more question. Since it's Thanksgiving, we're going to actually keep this session
Shorter.
a little shorter. So we're going to wrap up around 1 o'clock as opposed to normally we go to 1:30. But we can say a couple minutes extra in case somebody has a question.
The question may not be for everybody. I'm very new to Drupal, and I'm really glad when I was introduced to it, I really love it, and I'm really trying to really get into it. I have some problems, things I need to really ask somebody for about, and finding that it's really difficult to find. I don't know the right person to be directing.
So this is a general kind of statement on Drupal, and this is usually what I say. Drupal, I always say, is not rocket science. And so it's not anything that like, oh, you have to be some special kind of person to learn Drupal, but it is the type of thing that is really particular to Drupal. And so even people that actually are literal application programmers coming from other type of things, they come to Drupal and they're like, what is this? Because it's very different. And then everything will be changing in Drupal 8. But so for Drupal 7, it's just time and lots of it. So, for people that actually have been doing stuff, even if you're just site building, you don't have to be a programmer. There are a lot of people that can get really far just visiting contributed modules and stuff like that. But, if you're a couple of months, you're just like, almost like if you were a stand-up comedian that you've been doing it for a couple of months, and the professional stand-up comedians would say, oh, you wait to come back when you've done it for 10 plus years. So it's just a lot of time. And so you just want to be kind of like, understand that part of the process for all of us is you're just going to have to spend a lot of time. If you're lucky enough that your boss allows you to do that on work time, that's great. But I mean, frankly, a lot of people ramp up by doing, nights and weekends. And then a part of it is just like visiting the community and like going online. And, it's really hard to find somebody that'll just help you, with your particular problem, because every problem is unique. Because, one time it might be something really specific that you're doing, but it's, if somebody else were to come look at it, it might take them long enough to just kind of reverse engineer and go back out. So, some people, we've mentioned Open Berkeley a couple times in here. What we're trying to do with Open Berkeley is kind of the reverse. A lot of people on campus don't have the time and aren't interested not only in building the site, but also in maintaining. So the one thing with Drupal, obviously, is every week there's security updates that come. And once you build a site, somebody needs to maintain it with like every week. Check the security updates, patch them if you need to, update the sites and keep that current. So Open Berkeley, what we're doing is more, you don't need to learn Drupal. If you're using Open Berkeley,
IST will manage the site. We'll train you to kind of use our interface, and then you don't have to worry about learning Drupal. But BDUG is here for people that want to learn Drupal. Drupal's great, and but it is an investment of time. So come to these kind of meetings, but then again, start meeting people, trying to find, sometimes you'll, like I said, get little answers here and there, but it's hard to actually email somebody and say, hey, Quinn, here's my problem, can you solve it for me? Because, when we all get that kind of thing, the best that somebody can do that's, a little further on the line is give you some pointers. But unless you're gonna pay Quinn to say, spend 10 hours and look at this problem, it's a lot to ask a specific person, because that's not what they're not.
Yeah, so there's two things that I would recommend. One is the issue queue.
Yeah.
Someone, for the module, if the problem is specific to a particular module, then probably someone's encountered it before. And it may be a ticket that's 4 years old and they're still talking about it, or it may be something that there's a patch for. Things that are a problem at the intersection of two modules are a little harder to figure out, but again, sometimes they'll be in this issue queue or that. The other one is there's a Stack Exchange site for Drupal. It's drupal.stackexchange.com. And Stack Exchange is, if you've heard like Stack Overflow, is like a programmer's discussion site. Well, there are many, many community sites. There's one for WordPress, there's one for Linux, there's one for, GIS, all kinds of stuff. Drupal.stackexchange.com is a question and answer site specifically for Drupal. And if you have a really hairy problem there, you can post a question, try to put in your steps to reproduce, just like you do in the issue queue. And there may be someone there, or just search the archives, because there's a ton of archives there. You might find that helpful.
Yeah, to that point, those are great points, Caroline. Especially if you're trying to learn a module. A good thing to do is literally don't even look for open tickets. Look for every ticket. If you have time to invest, and just go read through. Sometimes it's like 4 years ago, and you can just read through, because some of your problems have been solved 4 years ago, but you might be doing something wrong. So literally, you spend a lot of time, and you get your glass of wine or whatever, and just go read through old issue queues. And I just scan the subjects and then say, ooh, that's kind of close to what I'm doing. And sometimes when you actually start reading issue queues, and again, half of them might be resolved if you're new to it, you'll get a hint that isn't actually solving your problem, but you're like, I didn't even realize there was a conditional tab that I could go to do something, and then you go explore that and you solve the problem. So a lot of that is exactly what Caroline said, just kind of looking at that. And then the other thing with Drupal is getting good at Google, because chances are none of us have unique scenarios. There's somebody else out there, there's hundreds of thousands of people using Drupal. There's somebody else out there that has run into your use case. So, even when you get those scary looking PDO exception, PHP errors, if you can figure out the right thing to Google, you will start
actually,
finding things.
Don't type it into Drupal.org search.
No.
Because it's not a very good, the search engine is not, it's very bad at giving you the actual relevant results. It'll give you a bazillion results, but the relevant one's on page 6. Google is better at giving you the relevant results.
Yeah, for example, when I was even doing some research to verify stuff for this presentation, I was brought to directly in Google to Drupal.org issue stuff people had raised, and to the Stack Exchange that you mentioned, Caroline. I was sent to a couple results that people had posed there. So I think, like they've said, I'd like to echo that there's really a wealth of stuff out there, and there's a wealth of people who really want to get in and answer your question too, because they're really interested in contributing and giving back since it's open source. So.
Thank you very much.
How long have you been learning Drupal?
I did it in class.
So are we talking about?
All right.
All right.
Okay.
It was October, yeah.